Welcome back to Fast Market on the TD Ameritrade Network. I'm Tom White, joined by my co-host Kevin Hinks. But let's bring in our next guest for our cash tag segment. It's going to be Andy Swan, the co-founder of LikeFolio. Welcome back to the show, Andy.
Hey, thank you.
All right, so we're talking Constellation Brands. We're talking booze, one of my favorite topics here. Stock's only down about 5% this year. It seems like it's pretty resilient in this recessionary environment. What kind of data do you guys have out of LikeFolio on this stock ahead of earnings?
Yeah, this is just a really good company with a really broad portfolio of brands. I think that served them really well in this market. You know, unlike some competitors that kind of went all in on hard seltzer, Constellation Brands kept it more, straight down the line. And I think they're starting to benefit from that in a pretty big way. One of the things we look at when we're looking at, companies with this many brands is how much do people actually like the overall portfolio? How much do each of these brands resonate with consumers? And when we look at consumer happiness levels for Constellation Brands versus peers, it's generally comes out on top of the pack, and it is right now against some pretty good competition. So that's always a good sign. And then in terms of what's driving growth and what the company's betting on, their Modelo brand, their Mexican beers portfolio is really taking off. Like I said before, a lot of companies went all in on hard seltzer, which was a pretty good fad for a while. But now the Mexican beer segment is absolutely taking off. I mean, our research team looked into the earnings transcript from last time, and a quote off the earnings transcript was, Modelo is on fire. And when you hear that from a company and you see it in LikeFolio data, congruently, something very good is happening. And so I think this is a company, again, with a very wide array of products: wine, liquor, beer. It's the beer segment, I think, that's driving a lot of the growth. And this is a company that can take those consumer shifts in preference or in trend and just simply leverage up the brands that are working and leverage down the ones that aren't. They have a lot of control over what happens in liquor stores in terms of shelf space. And so they're able to really lean on that, unlike some other companies that are more single brand focused. So I think, Constellation, just kind of that perennial defensive play. If you're looking for a company that probably does well in any type of economy and looking to get into a stock on dips, this is one I would definitely at least have on my radar. For the overall market, I think this is a pretty good one having in a defensive section of a portfolio.
Andy, you are spot on in terms of the popularity of Modelo. I was just on a golf trip with a bunch of 60-year-old relics of human beings, and guess what they were all drinking? Modelo. How is that possible that these guys were drinking Modelo? But that was the beer of choice in this group. But they've also got their pricier brands. High West Whiskey is doing well. Prisoner Wine is doing well. Pacifico putting up big numbers. That's my personal favorite over Modelo is Pacifico. Andy, which is it? Is it still beer? I mean, they have good wine. They have good wines. The wine and spirits were the weakest of the group. But what's the balance between beer and some of their other brands that seem pretty popular? Or is it just, it's Modelo, it's a little bit of Pacifico, but it's mostly, you're right, this Modelo brand is the shining star of this company.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And that's one of the great things. Sometimes we talk about Pepsi or, some of these companies that own so many different brands. Eventually you get to a point where you almost can't lose. Now, you can't win too big either because you have such a wide variety of things that you're offering that you have to continue to carry, even if they aren't selling well at the moment. But when you do have a star like they do in Modelo, you can leverage that up pretty easily. And I think that's what the company's doing. It's going to continue to drive growth. Another one that you didn't mention, Prisoner's doing very, very well. But the Casa Noble Tequila, we've seen a brand buzz increase by over 300% year over year. So that's kind of one of those moonshot brands. It's also in the portfolio. I know tequila has been a rising star as well across the board, and so they have a winner in that category as well. So again, this is a company that just they throw a lot of darts, and whichever ones are hitting, they just throw them more often. And I think that's a pretty good business strategy, especially in perhaps a downturned economy.
Yeah, and Andy, people forget that they own Corona too. I think,
right.
I mean,
the fact that we're talking this long and we haven't even mentioned Corona.
Right, and that was their shining star. Over the last 20 years, they've pivoted more towards Modelo and Pacifico. You see ads all over the place. You watch a football game, and it's all Modelo and Pacifico at this point. Have they done the job that investors want to see, where they buy specific brands and names, where they can actually just pivot their marketing a little bit, and that becomes the next hot beer, as opposed to some of their competitors, whether it's Molson Coors or Anheuser-Busch Budweiser?
Yeah, I think so. And it's not just, I would say that they are also good at reacting to shifts in consumer trends. I don't think they're really out there setting them. I think if they could have continued betting on Corona for the next decade, they would have done so. But Modelo started to take off, and they were nimble enough to put leverage behind that to increase shelf space, distribution, and then marketing. And I think that's a really good formula for success for these companies. They don't move too fast, but they do listen really well to the consumer, and they tend to follow suit and bet big on the winners. So I think, long term, this is a company that if you want to be comfortable owning a company that tends to execute really well, this one would be near the top of the list in terms of, especially outside of tech. This is a company that just continues to execute over and over again, wide portfolio, pretty recession proof, just an interesting company to have on our show today.
Yeah, it is, and it's making me thirsty just talking about it, but we've got earnings tomorrow morning. Do you guys have a score from LikeFolio on this one?
Yeah, actually really pretty neutral on the company from an earnings perspective, mostly because the stock has held up so well. We're pretty bullish on this long term, really like the company, but the stock has held up really well this year, especially compared to the rest of the market. So that's how we come up and end up with a neutral earnings score. We think the stock's priced about right, and we'll be looking for it more if there was a negative reaction to perhaps pick up some shares.
All right, great stuff. As always, neutral on Constellation Brands. And you're right, they have had a good year, down only 5%, so severely outperforming the major indices so far this year. All right, Andy, great stuff as always. Have a good day.
Thank you, you too.
All right, that's Andy Swan, co-founder of LikeFolio, breaking down the data on booze.